I'm going to talk to you about choice, and actually, I am going to give you some parenting advice, and you're not going to follow it. So we might as well get our cards on the table, and we can fight about why you should follow it when I'm finished giving my talk. Let me just say, before I start, I want to say this organization, Maggie and Lonnie's, and the many volunteers, is the most unbelievable thing I've ever seen. I can't believe I just can't believe the riches that are laid before you. And let me say, I can't believe that so many of you actually come to these events. So you should give yourself a round of applause too. It's really astonishing. And I'm honored to be part of it. Okay, let's get down to work. There is, in the United States especially, but in most of the developed world, a set of assumptions about life that I have come to think of as the official syllogism. And it runs roughly like this. The more freedom people have, the better off they are. If there's one thing that you can't have too much of, it's freedom. If we want to enhance welfare, if we want to enhance well-being, if we want to enhance happiness, we should do everything we can to enhance freedom. This is an assumption that is so deeply embedded in our culture that it doesn't even occur to people that they're making it. And you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone who would disagree. If you accept this assumption, as we pretty much all do, the question that you might ask yourself is, how do you go about enhancing freedom? And the answer, the second part of the syllogism, is just as obvious. The more choice people have, the more freedom they have. Freedom is completely empty. It's a false promise. If you're told you can do whatever you want, but there's really only one thing available for you to do. So, if more freedom means more well-being, more choice means more freedom. And if you accept these two assertions, then what follows? What follows as the night and day is that the more choice people have, the better off they are. If more freedom means more well-being and more choice means more freedom, then it must be true that more choice means more well-being. And have we acted as if this is true in our efforts to enhance the well-being of our citizens? You bet we have. This was my trip to a local supermarket, and it isn't even a very big supermarket. It's near the Schwartz College campus where I work. And I just went up and down the aisles counting, hoping that no one would arrest me. And nobody arrested me, and this is what I found. Now, you must admit that this is a lot of choice. And this is 10 years old, so you can probably increase each of these categories by 30 or 40% to get an accurate assessment of what we currently face in supermarkets. There is an extraordinary amount of opportunity for us to choose exactly the soups and salad dressings and toothpastes and cereals and even dental floss that we want. Now, arguably, this is not a big deal because we have always had choice when we do our grocery shopping. Now we just have more. So this is a mere quantitative change. Although I think there are times when mere quantitative changes are big enough that they become qualitative changes. But we're used to doing this when we shop for our groceries. There are other parts of our lives where we used to have no choice, where we now have significant choice. And these, I think, are more impactful, and if you accept the syllogism, make a bigger contribution to our well-being. And I'll just give you a few examples. One of them is phone service. I wasn't doing a careful inspection of the audience, so I don't know how many of you are old enough to remember a time when there was a count of one telephone company, and it offered one telephone and one telephone calling plan, and there was only one choice to make, and that was whether to use it. In fact, you didn't even own your phone, you rented it, which had the benefit that it never broke, since if it broke, the phone company had to come and fix it. As you all know, and no doubt you all celebrate, those days are gone. So these are the cell phones of the future. The one in the middle is my favorite. It's an MP3 player, a nose hair trimmer, and a creme brulee torch. I want to point out that this cartoon is 8 years old. It's pre-iPhone. And so having a phone that did things like this looked just completely preposterous. And it just shows you that you can't satirize. Because 2 days later, what you have satirized has become reality. Nowadays, there's really nothing that you can't do with a phone. And this leads people to go into their cell phone store and ask this question. You have a phone that doesn't do too much. And the answer to this question is no. There's only one kind of phone that you can no longer buy, and that is a phone that's just a phone. This, for those of you who are aware, is actually a bit of a lie. There is one phone that's just a phone. It's called a jitterbug. You know what it is? It's for really old people. It's just a phone, and the buttons are like this big, so that no matter how myopic you are, you can make them out and use the phone. But you can't buy that at any store. You have to send away for it, because who would want a phone like that? So here's an area, it's not the big and most important thing in the world, although people under the age of 15 think it is the most important thing in the world, where we used to have no choice, and now we have a lot of choice. You can spend a week trying to decide what phone to buy, what company to subscribe, what plan to choose, and so on. Here's another area with more consequences. We have essentially turned the zoo over to the animals, if you'll pardon me for being crude. You have distribution requirements in most self-respecting colleges and universities, but those distribution requirements have become a joke because what we offer students is not a set of courses that every educated person should take, but a cafeteria menu of dozens, hundreds, perhaps even thousands of courses from which students have to choose 6. So you get to do pretty much anything you want to do when you go to college. And this was not true. Even not that long ago, they even had electricity. When I went to college, the first 2 years were largely prescribed for me by my elders. And although I was annoyed to take some of the classes I had to take, I didn't have many decisions to make in my first 2 years of college. Another area that's even more consequential, healthcare. Doctors don't tell patients what to do anymore. They're not supposed to tell patients what to do. It's unethical to tell patients what to do. The ethic of American medicine is what's known as the ethic of patient autonomy, which means that doctors propose, they lay out the options, and patients dispose, patients make choices. And so if any of you, I hope this doesn't happen, have a serious illness, and you see your doctor, and the doctor says, well, you know, we can do surgery or we can do chemotherapy. These are the risks and benefits of surgery, these are the risks and benefits of chemotherapy, what do you want to do? Your eyes might get very big, you might look at the doctor like he or she had lost his mind and say, what do you mean, what do I want to do? What should I do? And the doctor says, well, I told you all I can. These are the risks and benefits of one thing, these are the risks and benefits of the other, what do you want to do? And you'd say, Doc, if you were me, what would you do? And if the doctor's being ethical, the doctor says, but I'm not. And so a life and death decision is put into the hands of people who A, are in terrible shape for making such decisions because they're sick, and B, don't know them. This in the service of catering as much as we possibly can to freedom of choice on the part of every American citizen. There's been research on this. Roughly 80% of people don't want to make these decisions. They want to be told what to do by their doctors, but their doctors refuse to do it. We see a slightly toned down manifestation of this with the Medicare Part D prescription drug plan. The government gave senior citizens a gift, and it was a gift that senior citizens didn't want. Why? Because they had 50, 60, 70, 80, 100 different prescription drug plans to choose from, and they simply couldn't figure out which plan was the right plan for them to choose. They asked their doctor, which plan should I choose? The doctors didn't know. They asked their children, which plan should I choose? And their children, arrogant children, figured that this was a 5-minute decision, and they couldn't figure out which plan their parents should choose. They asked the pharmacist who couldn't figure out which plan they should choose. They called the 800 hotline, Medicare hotline, to get advice, and it turned out that half of the answers to questions provided by that hotline were incorrect. So even the people who authored the program couldn't figure out which plans for you to choose. And the result is that you had to bully senior citizens into taking this gift because they were so overwhelmed by the decision-making process. Retirement plans. The company pension is a thing of the past, as you probably all know, and instead you get a 401k, and if your employer takes that syllogism seriously, you don't get a 401k with 1 or 2 mutual funds to choose from. You get a 401k with 20, 50, 100 mutual funds to choose from. Isn't that fantastic? Each of us can choose exactly the retirement vehicle we want. We'll see how fantastic that is. And finally, not really finally, because this is true of every aspect of our lives, when it comes to marital and family arrangements, we have a kind of choice that was unimaginable in previous generations. What do I mean by that? Well, there was, if you asked yourself the question, should I get married? There was a default answer. And the default answer was yes. Which is not to say that everyone answered in that way, but it is to say that most people never ask themselves the question. If you had asked yourself the question, when should I get married? There was a default answer to that also. And the default answer was as soon as possible. Should I have children? Yes. When should I have children? As soon as possible. Not everyone followed this script, but almost everyone followed the script. And what that meant is that you only had one question to answer, and that question was, who? And judging from what I read, people aren't so good at answering that question. So they're certainly not good at answering all these other questions. Nowadays, at least on the two coasts, and perhaps little islands of rationality like Chicago, there are no default answers to any of these questions. Any possible arrangement of romantic, intimate relations is open to you, and it's up to you to decide what kind of intimate life you want. And so, you put it all together, and what you see is that the world used to look kind of like this, and now it looks like this. And the question is this good news or bad news? And you know the answer to this question. The answer to this question is yes. Now, I am not going to talk about what's good about it. And there is a huge amount that's good about it. It's good that doctors aren't so arrogant and paternalistic. It's good that you have all these salad dressings to choose from. It's good to have a cell phone in your pocket so that you can always be connected to the world no matter how much you don't want to. All these things are wonderful. It's good to be able to work from your bed in your pajamas. Having all this choice is just terrific. Psychologists have studied the importance of choice and control, and there's a huge amount of evidence that it is essential to well-being for us to be able to exercise control over significant things in our lives, and you can't exercise control unless you have choice. The mistake that psychologists are making, the mistake that economists are making, the mistake that policymakers are making, is to assume that since choice is good, it is only. And the work that I've done a little of, and other people have done a lot of, and that my book writes about, explores the dark side of choice. What's bad about having all this choice? We know what's good about it. What's bad? And it turns out that there's a lot that's bad about it. One thing that's bad about it is that instead of liberating people, paradoxically, it paralyzes. There are Sheena Iyengar, who's a psychologist at Columbia, has done the best work on this. I'll just give you a couple of examples. The famous example is the so-called JAM study, which she conducted in a fancy food store near Palo Alto, or in Palo Alto. And this store, every time they get a new product, they set up a display table so people can taste it. And Sheena convinced them to let her do a study where she set out this display of 30 different flavors of imported jam. And if you stopped by the table and you tasted the jam, you get a coupon that would save you $1 on any jam you bought. few days later, she set up a display table with 6 different flavors of jam instead of 3. Once again, you stop by, you taste the jam, you get a coupon, saves you $1. Now what she found 2 interesting things. The first interesting thing is that more people come to the table when there are 30 jams than there are 6. It's more interesting, it's more exciting, it's more mysterious. They eat more jam. I mean, it's got all kinds of stuff going for it. But 1/10 as many people buy. 1/10. This is a mammoth thing. Why is it that 1/10 as many people buy jam when there are 30 on display than when there are 6? The answer is they can't figure out which jam to buy. And so, what do? They choose none of the above. What the hell, I'll buy peanut butter. And since I'm not buying jam, I'll eat the peanut butter and the bread will stick to the roof of my mouth and nobody will be able to understand what I'm saying. So this is one example. Not an important example, but nonetheless a vivid one. Here's a second example that's a tad more important. You know what speed dating is? Do they have speed dating in the middle of the country? I think speed dating is a thing of the past, since nowadays people can do digital dating. But speed dating, you'd actually show up in a place, physical place, and other people would show up in the same physical place, and you would have 10-minute conversations with potential romantic partners. And then somebody would blow a whistle, and if you were interested in the person you just talked to, you let the organizer know, and if the person you just talked to was interested in you, he or she would let the organizer know, and if you were interested in each other, email addresses would be exchanged, get in touch, and a month later you'd be married. So, you know, in places like New York and probably Los Angeles, where people with busy lives and have important things to do, no one has time to go out on dates, so you sort of do a year's worth of socializing in one night. That was the idea. So Sheena set up a speed dating evening, 2 of them, and on one of these evenings, people met 12 partners. And in the second evening, people met 6 partners. So I asked you, are you more likely to make matches when you see 12 people or when you see 6 people? What does logic demand? 12, right? Well, it turns out that people made more matches when they saw 6 people than when they saw 12. It's the same reason that people don't buy jam when there are 30 flavors. They don't buy marriage when there are 12 dates. Now just think about these dating sites when there are 12 million people. It's a good way to control the size of the population. Okay, to raise the stakes even more, let's go back to retirement, 401k. This again is work that Sheena did. Vanguard is a gigantic mutual fund company. They service the retirement plans of lots and lots of employers. So she got access to the employee participation records at several hundred companies, all of them serviced by Vanguard. The companies differed from one another in how many mutual fund options they made available to their employees. Some made 2 or 3 available, some made 10 available, some made 50, some made hundreds. And her question was, how does the number of possible retirement vehicles affect the likelihood that you'll sign up and participate? Simple question. Once again, logic would demand that the more options you have, the more likely you are to find one that suits you, or more than one. What she found, however, is that the more options there were, the less likely people were to sign up. For every 10 options that were available, rate of participation went down 2%. This is a mammothly important thing to know, because Americans don't save. And the worst thing you can possibly do is introduce something that discourages saving even more. What's also astonishing about this finding is that they were, by not participating, they were passing up significant matching money from the employer. The employers were prepared to write a check for $5,000 and put it into the retirement account. And people chose none of the above, lighting a match to a $5,000 bill, because it was so hard to decide which ones to invest. So this is an extremely significant practical finding, and it shows that whether you're talking about trivial things like jam or really very consequential ones, like whether you're going to have to eat dog food when you retire, when you give people too many options, it paralyzes. The second thing that I won't talk about, because I don't have time, is that when you give people lots of options and they overcome paralysis, they choose badly. Making decisions like this is not easy. It's hard enough when there are only a few options to consider. When there are many options to consider, the quality of decisions goes way down. And there's lots of research that documents this, but you'll just have to take my word for it. Because I want to focus on the next thing so that I don't actually keep moving. So too much choice produces paralysis. You overcome paralysis, too much choice produces bad decisions. Suppose you overcome the bad decisions and the paralysis, and you make good decisions. The third thing that happens when people choose from choice sets that are too large is that it undermines the satisfaction that people get even from good decisions. When you choose something from a large choice set, it isn't as good as when you choose exactly the same thing from a small choice set. Now, I know what you're thinking. This might be true of other people who are stupid, but it isn't true of me. When I go to the Italian restaurant and I order, I don't know, pasta with bolognese sauce, what difference does it make how many other dishes there are on the menu? Either the pasta's good or it's not good. I'm not going to be affected by all of these other options that I rejected. Only foolish people are affected by the options that they reject. Okay. Makes you feel better to think better about yourself, by all means go ahead. There are several reasons why, when we make choices from large choice sets, we are less satisfied than we would be if we made the same choice from small choice sets. The first is regret. So you order the spaghetti with bolognese, and it's good. Maybe it's a tad too salt. Just a tad. You know, and the portion is, it's like only enough to feed you. You're used to getting portions of pasta that can feed the entire Western world. So you're a little disappointed with the portion size. It's really good, but it isn't perfect. Do you think one of the other options would have been better? Well, that kind of depends on how many other options. When there are 2 other options, then maybe not. When there are 20 other options, well, then probably yes. And so anytime you make a choice, and you experience anything that's at all disappointing about the choice, it is easy for you to think that if you had made another choice, you would have done better, and that induces you to regret the choice that you made. And the regret that you experience subtracts from the satisfaction that you would otherwise be getting from your bolognese sauce. I know, as I say, that none of you have ever had this experience, just that everyone else has. Anticipated is worse even than actual experience regret. Because here's what anticipated regret. How do you avoid regretting your decision? There's really only one way to avoid regretting decisions. You know what that is? You don't make them. You can't regret decisions that you haven't made. And so, one of the principal drivers of the paralysis that we see when people are confronted with large choice sets is that they don't want to experience buyer's remorse. And the way you avoid experience buyer's remorse is by buying. And so what if you happen to be arguing? So this is one reason why even when people make good decisions, they are less satisfied than they would be if they were choosing from smaller choice sets. Related to this, but not the same, is what I come to call missed opportunities. So in the case of the bolognese sauce, your worry is that maybe you made the wrong choice. But suppose you know that it was the right choice. It's delicious. It's just wonderful. It's rich. It's satisfying. It's not too salty. Everyone is looking at you enviously. You couldn't have done better. But you passed up the chicken Florentine. And although the bolognese was the right choice, it really would have been nice to eat some of that chicken Florentine. And you passed up the seared salmon. And you passed up the lobster flan diable, if they still make that dish. You know, there are all of these other attractive opportunities that you passed up, even though the thing you chose was the right thing. Now what happens? As you are eating your sumptuous, rich, and delicious bolognese, is everyone getting hungry? What happens is as you put a forkful in your mouth, you're thinking, oh, that lobster, oh, that chicken, oh, that veal, and all of these missed opportunities add to one another and subtract from the satisfaction that you get from what you ordered, even when you ordered the right thing. No mistake has been made. That's what I'm suggesting. That's what makes it different. So here's an example of the effects of missed opportunities. Certainly nobody warned me about this before I started having kids. So for those of you who are not intimately familiar with Midtown Manhattan, I suspect that downtown Chicago is analogous. They live in Midtown Manhattan with all these high-rise buildings, and they're vacationing in the Hamptons. And as you can see, it's a beautiful day. They have the beach to themselves. But here's the problem. It's August. Everyone in their neighborhood is away on vacation. He could be parking the car right in front of his building. And so he spends 2 weeks on vacation in the Hamptons thinking about one missed great parking space after another. This is not a way to have a good time in the Hamptons. And one more example, those of you who are underage, close your eyes. So there are a couple of points I want to make about this. One is that no matter what you are doing, it means that there are other things that you could be doing that you aren't. If the set of other things that you could be doing and you aren't is relatively small, you will still be thinking partly about all those other things you might be doing, but it wouldn't completely poison the satisfaction you get out of what you are doing. But if the set of other things you might be doing is large, well then there's not going to be any satisfaction left for what you're doing. And the result is that there's really not much point doing it. And this is true even if it's the right thing to do. The second reason I chose this slide, aside from getting a cheap laugh from audiences, is that young people have this huge mistake, make this huge mistake because they think it is possible to do more than one thing. It ain't. If you go through life thinking that the way to solve the problem of the complex and varied temptations that confront me is that I will live my life multitasking, you are in for a life, I think, of misery, confusion, and disappointment of yourself and everyone else who depends on you. One thing at a time. So, I know that this is completely wasted breath if I'm talking to somebody under 25 who tends to think that this is my problem because I'm old and demented. But it's not their problem because they're masters of the universe. And so, one of them actually has the nerve to say that to me. I asked him innocently, so how come psych services in Schwartz is bursting at the seams? How come psych services at every institution I know about is bursting at the seams? All you young people are doing such a good job with your lives that you're seeking psychotherapy every waking minute of every day. Maybe you're not as good at this as you think you are. I don't really say that. But I really do think it. I want you to know, since I am a scientist, this is not just true in the New Yorker, it's also true in the laboratory. This lovely study was done some years ago that illustrates what missed opportunities are about. And here's what the study was. People did a short questionnaire study, and when they were done, the experimenter said, thank you very much for participating, and as a token of our appreciation, we'd like to give you a gift. You can have $2, or you can have this nice pen embossed with the university logo that sells in the bookstore for about $2.50. So you have a choice of a pen or $2.50 pen for $2 in cash. 75% of people choose the pen. Another group does the same 10 minutes. Thank you very much. And as a token of our appreciation, we'd like to offer you a gift. You can have $2. You can have this high-quality pen that's embossed with the university logo that sells in the bookstore for about $2.50, or you can have 2 less expensive. So all you're doing is adding a third option. And the question is, what percentage of participants choose either of the pens? And if you think about it for a moment, it should be clear to you that the answer to that has to be some percentage higher than 75. You see why that is? If a good pen is better than $2, a good pen is better than $2. And it doesn't matter what else is in your choice center. Yes? And there will be some people who don't think a good pen is better than $2, but they may think that 2 pens is better than $2. So 80%, 85%, 90%, that's what the answer has to be. 45% choose either of the pens. Why? Because they're looking at the good pen and they're thinking, it'd be nice to have this pen. But if I choose it, I pass up the opportunity to have 2. What does that do? It makes the good pen less good. They look at the 2 pen. That would be nice. But if I choose it, I pass up the opportunity to have a good pen. What does that do? It makes the 2 pens less good. How much less good? Just enough less good that neither of the pens is as good as $2. Whereas either of them by itself would have been better. So this is what a large array of opportunities does to the either expected satisfaction or experienced satisfaction that people get from whatever it is they choose. The sad truth is that everything suffers from comparison. And this is a very important lesson to learn. Because as a, quote, smart consumer, what does it mean to be a smart consumer? It means you do nothing but make comparisons. You don't want to be taken advantage of. You don't want to pay too much. You don't want to get a device that doesn't have all the latest features. So you compare and compare and compare one website after another. You'll be damned if you're going to make a mistake when you buy the latest version of your iPad. And the more comparing you do, the better the product is that you may end up with, the less satisfied you will be with that product. So there is a trade-off between the objective quality of the thing you get and the subjective satisfaction that you get out of having that. I don't know how to resolve that trade-off, but if the aim is actually to get some satisfaction out of the choices that you're making, it's sort of pointless to guarantee that you're making the best choice if you're going to end up miserable. So to raise the stakes quite a lot, I think this is exactly what is plaguing college graduates. And I think it is especially what is plaguing college graduates who go to the selective, high-class, elitist schools like the one where I teach. Why? Because what we are really good at doing is telling students, you can cultivate anything you're interested in. You can develop anything you're talented at. The world is available to you. Go and choose from the world. Everything is possible. That's what we oh, what's our trip? I understand there's a good hospital now. How far? So I'll stand on this side, there aren't any wine. So you can, the trouble is this is later. You can do anything and we'll help you. That's what we tell them. And they take advantage of all those opportunities. They really do. But these students know that a point is reached where they have to walk through a door and hear lots of other doors slam shut. They don't want to walk through that door until they know what door is the right door to walk through. They have no idea how to know. When they'll know, how to know, and the result, in the case of many students, is that they sort of spin their wheels, getting jobs at Starbucks, hoping that one morning they will wake up knowing I'm meant to be a doctor, I'm meant to be a lawyer, I'm meant to be a sculptor, I'm meant to be a school teacher, I'm meant to be a bookie, I'm meant to be a professional poker player, whatever it is. And so they spin their wheels until they have this instant. The trouble, of course, is that for many students, they never have this answer. And it makes the students slightly crazy, and it makes them completely frantic. Their parents say, so how long are you going to work at Starbucks? I think it's time you moved on and did something else, like go to graduate school or professional school or become an investment banker, something. You know, we didn't spend $200,000 so that instead of spending your life working at McDonald's, you spend your life working at Starbucks. Come on, grow up. So what students have learned to do is that they don't go to work at Starbucks anymore. They do something else that will get their parents off their backs. I discovered this when I made a huge mistake and I asked the students, so what are you going to do when you graduate? I had learned that that's a question you don't ask students, because if they know, they've told you. And if they don't know, this is not a conversation you want to have. But I slipped and I asked the question, and the student said to me exactly in this way. The student said, I'm going to law school, but I'm not going to be a lawyer. She didn't want me to think for even 5 seconds that she was going to be a lawyer. I scratched my head, as you might, and I said innocently, so why are you going to law school? And she said, you may have heard this, because no matter what I decide to do, a law degree will serve me. So here's what's going on. First of all, that's false. Second of all, everybody hates law school. Third of all, it's going to add another $200,000 to your debt. Here's why they do it. They do it because their parents don't know that I'm going to law school, but I'm not going to be a lawyer. Their parents mistakenly think she's going to law school and she is going to be a lawyer. So it's a way to get your parents off your back. Instead of working at Starbucks, you're making progress toward adulthood by going to law school. So I think that we have created a kind of false promise for our young people, and especially at institutions like mine, that everything is possible for everyone. And they figure out that that's not true, that they don't have any idea how to decide which things to pursue and which things to wave goodbye to. And many years ago, the poet Sylvia Plath, writing about herself, made this observation. She said about herself, from the tip of every branch, like a fat purple fig, a wonderful future beckoned and winked. One fig was a husband and a happy home and children, another was a famous poet, another was a brilliant professor, another was Europe and Africa and South Africa, another fig was an Olympic lady crew champion, and beyond and above these figs were many more figs I couldn't quite make out. I saw myself sitting in the crotch of this fig tree, starving to death, just because I couldn't make up my mind which of the figs I would choose. I wanted each and every one of them, but choosing one meant losing all the rest. And as I sat there, unable to decide, the figs began to wrinkle and go black, and one by one they clung to the ground at my feet. I can't say quite spectacularly well as she did, but this is the idea that I'm trying to capture. We are doing our young people no favor by presenting them with a world that has an infinite number of figs. The third thing that makes people miserable, even when they make good choices, is what I've come to call escalation of expectations. Those of you who read my book or have seen the TED Talk may remember that I had this experience buying jeans. And I went in to the Gap, which is where I bought my jeans, and I told them my size, and the clerk said, you want slim fit, easy fit, relaxed fit, butterfly, zipper fly, snow line, basketball, boot cut. And I said, listen, I want the kind that used to be the only one. And this, by the way, is a true story. I mean, it seems too good to be true, but it's actually true. And, you know, so the problem was that the clerk was like 12 years old. And had no idea what kind that was. And, of course, they didn't make that kind. So I spent 40 minutes trying on jeans. And it used to take me 30 seconds, now it took me 40 minutes. But the good news is that I walked out with the best fitting jeans I had ever had. I did better. Really and truly, I did better. And I felt worse. And it wasn't because it took me 40 minutes. It was because what happened when I found out that there were all these different flavors of cheese available is that I expected that one of those flavors would be perfect. When they only come in one or two styles, only an idiot or a supermodel expects perfection. But when they come in dozens and dozens of styles, surely one of them out there is perfect. What I got was good. But when I assessed it, the question I asked was not how good is it, but how good is it compared to how good I expected it. And my expectations had gone through the roof, so I ended up dissatisfied with what were, in fact, the best filling jeans I had ever owned. What happens when people have large choice sets, inevitably, I think, is that it causes expectations to rise. We are always assessing the consequences of our decisions by comparing them to how good we expect those decisions to be. And if you generate, for one reason or another, unrealistically high expectations, you can't help but be disappointed, even if you're good. And this is the third thing, I think, that does us in when we make choices from large choices. Here are some examples. I gather that I'm not the only one who has never had a contractor who came in under budget and ahead of schedule. Now I want to say a word about this because I don't want to romanticize the past. But here's the sense in which I think it is true that things were better when things were worse. It's true in that when things were worse, expectations were modest. And when expectations are modest, it is actually possible to have experiences that exceed expectations. In the world, let me bracket this, I'm not sure that the world we currently live in is the world that we lived in 5 years ago. But in the world we lived in 5 years ago, expectations were so high that the best you could ever hope to do was break them. It's possible that the financial collapse has actually had the effect of lowering those expectations, so that this cartoon may become true again, although it partly, I think, depends on how long the economic downturn lasts. It takes time for people to adjust their expectations about the world in a significant way. The final thing that does us in is that when you make a decision and it is disappointing, what you do, what we always do, is we ask the question why. Whose fault is it? Now, if you believe the other things I've said to you, many of your decisions, if not most of them, are going to end up disappointing because you'll regret anything about it that's not perfect. You'll be thinking about all the other nice things you've passed up. Your expectations will be so high, so however good it is, it's going to be disappointing. Why? Well, if there are 2 or 3 options and you're disappointed and you ask, whose fault is it? The answer is obvious. It's the world's fault. I mean, what could you do? There were only 3 options. If there are 30 options, or 300 options, and you choose one, and it's disappointing, and you ask yourself, whose fault is it? The answer is, again, obvious. It's your fault. Surely, one of those 300 options out there is perfect, and you failed to pick it. And I think that one thing that happens when people are making their choices from very large choices is that when they experience disappointments, they blame themselves. And this has significant, or can have significant, negative psychological consequences. So this is not trivial. It's not just about being vaguely and mildly disappointed that the bolognese sauce wasn't as good as you had imagined it would be. It can really be debilitating. I think this is part of why so many of the students who go to places like Schwartz seek psychological services. Their lives are not going the way they expect them to go, and they think they've done something wrong. And they expect them to go perfectly because the culture has told them that that's what's possible in America. Now, there's a wrinkle to this that I want to add, because this wrinkle actually either mitigates or exacerbates the choice problem. There are 2 different approaches you can take to making any decision. You can ask yourself, what's the best cell phone? What's the best college? What's the best restaurant in Chicago? I gather it's just about to close. what's the best marital partner? You can be what my colleagues and I call a maximizer, out to get the best. Well, how do you get the best? What do you have to do to get the best self? You have to look at every single one. That is to say, your search has to be exhaustive, which, when there are a lot of them, is exhausting, if not completely impossible. Or you can ask, what's a good enough cell phone, college, dish to order in a restaurant, and perish the thought, marital partner? We call these people satisficers. This is not a term we invented, but we borrowed it from a very distinguished psychologist and economist who coined the term half a century ago. So if you are looking for good enough, you don't have to do an exhaustive search. You sit down and you say, how good is good enough for me when it comes to whatever it is I'm choosing? And then you go looking at what's out there in the world, and as soon as you find something that's good enough, you pick it. End of story. You don't worry about what you may have passed up by not examining it. So, the question is, do people differ with respect to their decision-making goals? First, let me give you an illustration. This is a maximizer. And the reason I'm showing this to you, I'm making all kinds of assumptions about what your aspirations and expectations are about your children, given the community you live in. I can't tell you how many students are going to spectacular colleges and universities and wearing sweatshirts like that inside their heads. And what's heartbreaking about this is that if you think, while you are at Schwartz, that you should be at Yale, you're probably right, because you will not take advantage of what's going on. And if we create a sense in our children that there is a best place, there is a perfect place, and their ambition should to be in, first find it and then get into it, we are almost certainly guaranteed that they will be dissatisfied with wherever it is they end up, unless they end up in that best place. And it is such a waste of a resource. These schools are fantastic. And the idea that there are students in them who are not taking full advantage of what the schools have to offer is just is infuriating and heartbreaking at the same time. Here's another example of a maximizer. Here is a satisfaction. So we created a scale and we gave it to people, and as I say, people differ. Some score high as maximizers, some score low. And then we gave them other scales that people have developed and studied. And we find that whether you score high or low as a maximizer is correlated with other things that matter. So high maximizers are high maximizing scores are negatively correlated with these things: happiness, optimism, satisfaction in life, and self-esteem. What does that mean? It means the more of a maximizer you are, the less happy, the less optimistic, and the less satisfied you are. But it is positively correlated with something. It's positively correlated with regret, perfectionism, and depression. Extreme maximizers are borderline clinically depressed. So again, this is not trivial. It's not about choosing the wrong flavor of ice cream and wishing you could have it back. It can really produce painful consequences. We studied college seniors looking for jobs. This was an online stuff, an email-based survey of people at 15 different institutions in various parts of the United States and Canada, some of them big, some of them small, some of them selective, some of them not very selective. We tried to really get a range of places. And we started asking them about their job search in October of their senior year, and the study continued, and we bothered them every couple of months until June, when they had their job, or didn't have their job. And we were interested in how hard the decision was, how many options they wanted, how well they did, and how they felt about how well they did. And here's what we found. People who score high on maximizing considered more jobs, wanted more options, and did better. They got jobs with starting salaries that were $7,500 higher than the jobs that satisfied us. 20% premium in starting salary. They did better. It seems to me to suggest that you want to encourage your children to maximize starting now. So if you want to leave working on them. But before you do that, we also asked them some other questions. And we found that they were more pessimistic, anxious, stressed, worried, tired, overwhelmed, depressed, regretful, and disappointed. So they were less content, optimistic, elated, excited, and happy. Why only these things? Because these are the only things we asked them. So it looks like the summary is that maximizers do better and feel worse. About what? About the job they got, about the job search process, and about their lives in general. And I think this is probably in general true. You have a decision to make about getting the best objective result and getting the best subjective result. And they push you to different decision strategies. And I, after thinking about this a lot, I have come to the conclusion, you may not agree, that there's really nothing in life where it is more important to get the best objective result than it is to get the best subject. As long as you get a good objective result, it is really important that you feel good about it. Much more important than the small differences between the result you got and another result that might have been slightly different. And this brings me to college. Because I think colleges, high schools, and communities like this, parents are wrecking children. And they are wrecking children because we have created the myth that there is a best place to go. This is a two-sided myth. Students think there is a best college for me, which is false. Colleges think there is a best student for us, which is also false. Places like Schwartz get 3 or 4 times as many wonderful applicants as we can take, and we invent distinctions in order not to feel guilty that we are saying yes to some people and no to others. It is basically a crapshoot, but we're pretending it's not a crapshoot. What's the consequence of this? Incredible pressure on students to achieve in high school. How is this manifested? Not only do they not enjoy a minute of their time in high school, but they do all kinds of stuff that they have no interest in, so that they can look good in their college applications. And of course, the college people think we'll see right through all that. They volunteer, and they won't. They see through some of it, but they don't see through all of it. Why? Because you hire people to counsel students so that they can create applications that make it look like they really are the kind of people that they are pretending to be. So, I mean, I don't know how to change, well, I do know how to change this. I don't know how to make it happen. I think the pressure on you to encourage your kids to want to go to the best school is very powerful. And if you relax, you look to your left and you look to your right, and your friends and neighbors are not relaxing, and then you start looking at yourself in the mirror and you think, what the hell's wrong with you? Everybody else is frantic about this. Why am I so laid back? And so you start to think, well, I must be doing something wrong. You get a little bit less laid back, a little bit less laid back. And I think it actually ends up producing worse students, not better ones. And the reason I think is for two reasons. One, they do stuff that they think they should do instead of what they're interested in, which makes them much less interesting people. And two, they are so burned out by the time they get to college that they think, well, now it's just a smooth sail downhill to a cushy job and a life of the future. They are completely unprepared to make the kind of intellectual and motivational commitment that college demands because they've spent themselves getting into college. So I do have a remedy for this problem, and the remedy is that colleges should be satisfied. What do I mean? I mean that colleges should make a binary distinction among applicants. This applicant is good enough to succeed, and this one isn't. You go through all the applicants, you put all the good enough applicants in a pile, you throw all the not good enough applicants away, and you pick applicants who are good enough at random. And if you are lucky, you get into Schwartz or Yale or Princeton. And if you're not lucky, then you just have to suffer with, I don't know, Harvard or Brown. I think this is, in effect, the process that is currently being used, except no one is being honest about it. And if we were honest about it, it would just puncture the pressure balloon just massively all at once. Because you no longer would have to be the best kid in your graduating class. You just need to be a good enough kid who was liked. So I don't think there's much that you people can do about it. The colleges have to start. And I can't get a single college to think that the proposal I just made to you is a serious proposal. I am dead serious about it. I think it's the right thing to do. But until colleges start doing it, the pressure on, at lower levels of education will just be brutal, and kids will continue to suffer. So there's a little editorial. Okay, I'm almost done. Okay, so you remember way back at the beginning of the evening, sometime shortly after you heard that spectacular Chopin, I said to you that choice is good. Remember that? So I know that choice is, and then I spent 45 minutes talking about how choice is bad. So how can choice be both good and bad? Here's how. Sort of. Don't freak out if you think you can't do that. This is a schematic that plots on the x-axis the amount of choice people have, and on the y-axis how it feels to have that amount of choice. The horizontal line in the middle is neutral. So below that line you're suffering, above that line you're dancing and smiling. When you have no choice, all the way on the left, life is infinitely bad. This is not the way human lives are meant to be. As you start giving people choice, you make life better and better and better and better. But you'll notice that this curve is a curve, which means that what it evidences is what economists proudly describe as the law of diminishing marginal utility. Additional options produce smaller and smaller benefits until the curve virtually flattens out. Nonetheless, if you look at this curve, it is just undeniable that choice is good. If you want to live a moderately happy life, you need to have a certain amount of choice. Okay? So that's what's good about choice. All the stuff I've been talking about gives you this. When you don't have a lot of options, you don't have to worry about paralysis, you don't have to worry about regret, you don't have to worry about missed opportunities. As the number of options increases, all the things that I've been talking about increase. And unlike the positives, the negatives accelerate. The slope of the curve gets steeper and steeper and steeper as you move from the origin out to the right. So, what is good about choice and what is bad about choice are different processes. They are different sets of phenomena. Choice is simultaneously good and bad. And the question is, how does it feel to have any particular amount of choice? And you know how you answer that question? You simply add these two curves together. You combine the good and the bad, and when you do that, this is what you get. When you go from no choice to some choice, you improve lives. When you go from some choice to more choice, the curve changes direction. And when you overwhelm people with choice, as arguably we have done in modern culture, the curve actually crosses neutral and moves into negative territory. So we can give people exactly what people say they want, what they think they want, what the ideology of our culture says they want, and watch them suffer as a result of getting exactly what we all think they want. That, I think, is roughly the state that we are in modern society. And what it means, if you are interested as a policymaker or even in sales, is you have to find the sweet spot. How much choice is just the right amount of choice so that people derive all of the benefits, or most of the benefits, from having all of that choice without suffering the negative consequences that I've been talking to you about. And there is no single right answer to that question. Almost certainly the sweet spot depends on what domain you're talking about. There's a little bit of research that's been done on finding the sweet spot, and it has suggested that the right amount of choice is some number between 6 and 10 options. But don't write this down, because these were choices about very trivial things, and I have no reason on earth to suspect that the right number of options when you are choosing pen, writing implements, is the same as the right number of options when you're choosing cars, places to go to school, or people to spend the rest of your life. But there probably is a right number of options, and nobody has taken the trouble to figure out what that number is. And if we don't, if we just keep throwing options at people thinking more has to be better than less, we will continue to make people paralyzed with indecision and miserable when they make decisions that work out well. I'm almost. Okay. I will talk about this. Choice and happiness. Remember, the syllogism said freedom increases well-being, choice increases freedom, therefore choice increases well-being. What is the relation between choice and happiness? So, I don't want to be accused of being a bad scientist. This is false. People are not happy in stinking hellholes and unspeakable poverty. What is true, however, from lots of research, is that the gains to wealth are remarkably small once you cross subsistence. It is massively important to be on the right side of subsistence. It is not very important once you cross that line to be a little bit richer than your next door neighbor or a little bit richer than your brother. It is true that richer is happier, but it isn't. Richer isn't very much happier. How is this relevant to choice? It's relevant to choice in the following way. Income or wealth is a pretty good proxy for how much choice people actually have. It's not just about how many cell phones are out there. It's about how many cell phones are really in your consideration set. What is it plausible for you to think about buying? And that's largely going to be a function of how much money. There are lots of places to go on vacation, and if you have a lot of money, every single one of them is up for consideration. And if you don't have a lot of money, then most of them are not up for consideration. So I think it's a fair generalization that the richer people are, the more options they have, effective options they have, no matter how many options the world actually presents. So money doesn't do it. In fact, money may make the problem worse by giving people so much choice that they don't know how to pull the trigger. What does it do? Well, what we know from the same research is that the single most important determinant of well-being is close relations to other people. Being part of a network of family, friends, civic organizations, religious institutions, being connected to other people has the biggest impact on people's well-being of anything that's listed. Now, what I want you to appreciate about this is that the more connected you are to other people, less choice you have. Connections to other people limit. Connections to other people constrain. You won't take a job any place on earth if you are closely connected to friends and family and you want to stay in Chicago. You'll take the best job you can find that's, within 50 miles of where your people are. And all of a sudden your choice set is dramatically reduced. Nonetheless, despite that these close connections restrict the amount of choice we have, people who have close connections are happier than people who don't, which is itself a bit paradoxical. Now, what I used to think is that what this tells you is just how powerful being connected to other people is. We are willing to suffer reduced choice, which is enormously painful, in order to generate and sustain close relations. That's what I used to think. But I don't think that. I now think that being constrained is actually part of the benefit of having close relations. Because the world is otherwise not constrained. Here is something that takes an essentially infinite set of possibilities and reduces it to a finite and manageable set of possibilities. So part of what is good about being connected to other people is that limits your choice set. And having your choice set limited in the world we currently live in is a good thing, not a bad thing, at least for relatively affluent people like people in this world. So this is captured by my last piece of data. When I first saw this cartoon, I figured the point is that we sophisticated people are supposed to look at this dumb fish and laugh and scoff. Anything is possible, no limits. Look, there's nothing going on in that fish. What does this fish know about what's possible? We are much smarter than this. Ha ha ha, stupid. Then as I thought about it a little bit more, I don't know what the cartoonist had in mind, but as I thought about it a little bit more, I came finally to the conclusion that this fish knows something that we don't know. What this fish knows is that everybody needs a fishbowl. Everybody needs a context that limits choice. Now, if you're a human and not a fish, I'm willing to speculate that this context limits choice too much. We need our fishbowl to have other stuff in it. We need to be able to watch the Bulls and the Bears. By the way, the Bulls are going to lose to the Sixers. Our best players got crippled the other day. I'm sorry. I got to do a little bit of hometown stuff. Anyway, so everybody needs a fishbowl. And the truth is that if you shatter the fishbowl, you don't liberate, you terrorize and paralyze. And the difficult task that we face as human beings, as psychologists, as policymakers, is figuring out what needs to go inside the human fishbowl and what doesn't. I don't know the answer to that question, but I'm reasonably confident that that's the question we need to answer. Thank you very much.